What is the gender pay gap? Simply put, the gender pay gap is the gap between what women are paid and what men are paid. The most commonly cited gender pay gap statistic in the United States compares the median annual earnings of women who work full-time, year-round against the median annual earnings of men who work full-time, year-round. In 2016, the most recent year for which the federal government has released data, in this broad category women were paid 20% less than what men were paid. Or, put another way, women working full-time, year-round were paid 80 cents per dollar that men working full-time, year-round were paid. There are as many ways to calculate gender pay gaps as there are ways to calculate average pay earned by workers, as long as the original data source records whether workers are men or women. Researchers can and do calculate gender pay gaps that include only full-time workers, include both full-time and part-time workers, compare average earnings over the course of a year, over the course of a week, hourly, or over the course of a career, compare workers within only a particular state or other geographical area, compare workers within a particular industry or specific occupation, look only at a particular subgroup, such as Black or Hispanic workers, consider only workers with or without disabilities, look at the gender pay gap by education level, or include some combination of the above factors. Though the ratio of women's pay to men's pay varies depending on the data source and analysis, the finding that women are paid less than men is extremely consistent. For more detail on many of these breakdowns, see AAUW's The Simple Truth About the Gender Pay Gap. Why does the gender pay gap matter? The statistic for the pay gap between all women working full-time, year-round and all men working full-time, year-round is the most commonly used gender pay gap statistic and usually receives the most attention. Research tells us there are many factors contributing to the size of the gender pay gap: reduced hours worked because of time spent on domestic work and care work, reduced job tenure resulting from breaks in labor force participation to raise children, gender segregation by occupation and industry, and bias against women in leadership, to name a few. All of those factors are connected to gender norms and bias. Along with overt pay discrimination, these factors add up to a gap that has a big effect on women's economic status. More than $10,000 less in pay annually for full-time working women than men are paid. Lower pay is the reality for working women in the United States, regardless of the contributing factors. Lower pay is a reflection of less power in the workplace and jobs with less prestige, and lower pay contributes to higher poverty rates for women and their children and less money for women in retirement. The struggles facing women in our economy are complex, but the simple statistic comparing the median annual pay of women and men who work full-time is an important starting point in understanding the economic status of women. Is the pay gap a myth? The gender pay gap is math, not myth. Women working full-time, year-round take home 20% less pay than men working full-time, year-round. This is a government-published statistic based on a large, detailed, nationally representative survey of income in the United States, the annual social and economic supplements of the Current Population Survey. In 2016, the typical woman working full-time, year-round was paid more than $10,000 less than the typical man working full-time, year-round. That is a very real, substantial difference in the median earnings of women and men. But men and women work in different jobs. Is there a pay gap if you compare apples to apples? Yes. Government data breaking down the average pay of men and women working full-time within specific occupations show that in almost every occupation, men are paid more than women. In one of the largest samples of data and ranges of occupations available from federal government data, annual income estimates from the Census Bureau's National American Community Survey, 2010-15, the government tracked pay in 525 occupations. AAUW analyses revealed that in 416 of those occupations, men earned significantly more than women. In 106 occupations, the difference between men and women was not statistically significant. In 2 occupations, average pay could not be estimated for both men and women. Women were paid significantly more than men in exactly 1 occupation out of the 525 occupations that were tracked: dietitians and nutritionists. But men and women do tend to work in different jobs, a phenomenon called occupational gender segregation. Most workers in construction, manufacturing, and transport occupations are men, and most workers in healthcare and education occupations are women. The jobs that men typically work pay better than the jobs that women typically work, even after accounting for their skill and education requirements. For instance, full-time parking lot attendants, usually men, are paid more to watch cars than full-time childcare workers, usually women, are paid to care for children, even though childcare workers are increasingly being pushed to earn a college credential. Don't men work longer hours than women? Most published pay gap estimates compare full-time workers with other full-time workers. But yes, women are more likely than men to work part-time, and among full-time workers, men work longer hours on average than do women. However, on average women do more housework and care work than men. Men's longer work hours are subsidized and facilitated by unpaid labor done by women, contributing to the gender pay gap. Why don't women just choose higher-paying jobs? Seeking out jobs in higher-paying occupations, such as those more typically held by men, does increase women's earnings but only to a point. Women working in male-dominated occupations are paid better on average than women working in female-dominated occupations, even accounting for the typical skill or education required in those occupations. But researchers reviewing data from 1950 to 2000 found that when occupations change from being male-dominated to female-dominated over time, the pay changes.